You might have expected to hear a trumpet, but you only heard the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece. What does Kuf have to do with the mouthpiece? What does Kuf have to do with a scythe, a sickle of harvesting? What does Kuf have to do with a monkey? The word Kof, spelled Kuf Vav Pei, literally is the word monkey. And as we looked at the other letters, Aleph means ox, Bet means house, Gimel means camel, Dalet is something hung like a door. A door is hung by the hinges on the wall. Hey means the, but it also, as we talked, it's like a window or an illumination or to reveal something, to disclose something. Vav literally is a connector. It means and we talked about the Vav man being the one that connects this to that. Zion is a weapon. Chet is a fence. Tet is something that spins, and so there's the picture of the full basket, there's the picture of the potter's wheel. Yod literally is a hand, and Yod basically as a prefix means he will. Yod as a suffix means so it's speaking of the artist. So what I'm trying to show you is that in every letter, I'm trying to give you an overview where we are so far. In every letter, the name of the letter itself literally describes what the letter is all about. So it's not so hard necessarily to read Hebrew if you know the names of the letters, and if you know what the letters mean, that's one level of understanding. So if we progress through, Kaf literally is an open hand. Lamed means teach and learn. Mem is water. Nun is fish, or that which is engaged in the activity of life. Samech is a prop or a support structure. Ayin literally is an eye. Pei is literally a mouth. Zadi means righteous. Remember we had this harpoon, the shape of the letter Zadi last week. So here we are at Kuf, and it means monkey. So what has a monkey got to do with this? Suddenly that's a kind of a little bit of a strange connotation. Resh, the next letter for next week, means head, but it's also, again, if you look in the Red Dictionary, it's chief or summit, but also it can mean, similar to Aleph, foundation and the basic principle. So you could say, well, that's where you start, right? You start at the foundation. So that's kind of like the first thing. But then also when you get up and you put the roof on, if you're doing a building project, well, which one is the top? Which one is the resh? Well, there's these two concepts of principal matters. Sheen means, it's where we get the word shine, it means teeth. Teeth consume, so teeth can also mean fire, not just teeth that eat. And then Tav, shaped like an X, is literally the sign or the mark, something at the end, and it's the last letter. So this is just this overview. Why am I giving you an overview for Kuf? We've tried to kind of give you an overview each week. This picture here, see, it's the same picture on my shirt. It's also the same picture down here on the chart. I have the explanation back there. Does somebody mind grabbing me that so I don't have to run down there with this? On the right next to the white thing there. I'm going to address this picture real quick. Maybe I can leave this up here as a reminder. Thank you very much. In the book, the last book, the Tav book of the canon of the scriptures, it's called the Revelation. Sometimes it's called the Apocalypse, but it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. That's the way it's listed, but other people call it the revelation of John. It's actually what John saw. And it's generally regarded that the book of Revelation is pictures or images concerning what comes at the end, what comes later. I've heard it said that, oh, we got one here, Jamie, I had it sitting there, thank you. I've heard it said that some Jewish scribes consider the book of Revelation to be plagiarized, to be the stolen book. It's like, well, what does that mean? It means they ripped it off from some Old Testament writings. That the images, the concepts, the things embedded in the book of Revelation are not Christian. They're not this New Testament gospel. Now, I'd have to go through and regard the study and try to pick out, well, what are they talking about? But what I'm saying is, the stuff at the end is an overview, you might say, the stuff that's in the book of Revelation, concerning the things that we've already been given. This letter Kuf, you draw it like that, it's kind of a mushroom shape. See the mushroom shape there? Kind of like an atom bomb explosion. It's also the kind of picture a helicopter, right? It's got the rotary blades up here, and the helicopter rises up and sets down. Does anybody know that song that was playing in the very beginning? Kumi Ori. Does anybody know what Kumi Ori means? Does anybody know what Kumi? Does anybody recognize the word or ori? Light. Okay.
Come light.
So ori is aleph vav resh. In ori, you add a yod at the end. That means basically my, and aleph vav resh is light. But kumi is actually kuf vav mem yod. Well, here we have this word kum. It sounds a lot like the word comb. Well, there's two types of comb, and I'm trying to show you the similarity between some English words in Hebrew, is that a comb, I'll draw it this way, it has all these teeth that stand up. That's literally what kum or kumi means. But a comb is also, you see this a rooster, and he has this thing on his head. That's also a comb. It's the same thing. It means to stand or to arise. So the phrase kumi ori means arise and shine. But if you look at the Hebrew words literally, my light is not the word to shine. Sheen sometimes can have a word of a connotation of to shine, and there's some other words that can mean shine. Kuf resh nun, it's pronounced, it could be Karen. It's also where we get the word corona or cornea, that which gets hard. You get older, sometimes your cornea gets hard. But it's also the word for horn, and it says that when Moses came down from the mountain, he had horns. And so I've seen pictures of illustrations people have made of Moses, and he's got these horns coming out of his head. And it's like, why does he have horns? Because they're radiating beams shining. That's this word here. So you could say, well, corony or coronet. Well, coronet, that's like a trumpet. So we talked before about this word or being where you get auricular, which has to do with hearing. You also have aurora, and it also means light. Light and sound produce waves, frequencies. Sound and light are essentially the same thing. Just we have different receptors, eyes and ears, but essentially the same thing. And in Hebrew, it's like the same word. And then there's other English words that come out of the Hebrew, which kuf resh nun has to do with trumpet noise. And so when we get the menorah, equivalent with the letter Samech, and I was saying that it lines up with the Feast of Trumpets. Well, what's the relationship between the trumpet and the menorah? You fill the menorah with oil, and it produces a fruit of light. You fill the trumpet with breath, it produces the fruit of sound. It lines up with the Beatitude, where he said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be filled." I'm trying to show you different patterns. So a lot of this study that we're doing is all about the patterns of seeing the pieces of the Mishkan in the scripture, seeing the meanings of the letters of the alphabet in various scriptures, and blending them together, appropriating them together, and then using the red dictionary that I mentioned this crazy 8 concept. And again, what that is, it's a kid's game. You play with a deck of cards. There's 4 suits, usually in the deck of cards, and then there's a bunch of numbers. And so if somebody were to play, like I said, 4 of diamonds, the next person can play any 4 or any diamond. And if they don't have that, they can throw down a crazy 8, which means, okay, you can do anything you want. You can change it to whatever you want. But the idea is, if you know what the alphabet is, and if you know what the Mishkan pattern is, then when you see one thing, you can jump to, for example, this letter Samik here in the orange. Today, purple shirt, got the purple letter Kuf. Look at the letter Kuf. You can look at any of these things related to the letter Kuf, and if it reminds you of something else, you can jump off from that meaning and go into another part of your study. So the reason the very first week, the Aleph seemed like it was all over the place. And then the next week I showed you the picture of the banyan tree, which is a physical manifestation of the concepts I was trying to tell you at the week of the Aleph, which seemed like they were all over the place, but they're not all over the place. They're connected. Like the banyan tree has roots and branches that connect like crazy all over the place. And you can get apparently many acres of one tree. And so the idea is, how do you make these connections in Hebrew? It's this type of a thing, where I'll go into some of the things later and show you what I mean by this type of crazy 8 connection. What I'm trying to show you about the letter Kuf is, what has that got to do with Kumi Ori? If it has to do with the word Kumi is Kuf and Mem, and it has to do with arise and shine, because what? Well, the thing about the Kuf, what are monkeys known for? Jumping around, and what else? What does a monkey do that nobody else does? So he can leap from here to there, right? He's also got this long arm of a reach. So here in a picture form, you've got this long-armed reach. This is a pretty long blade coming out there, and it's kind of this Kuf notion. If you have a sickle like what's drawn on the communist flag, which is a smaller reaping sickle, it would be shaped like that, right? Same concept. Interestingly enough, and I could do this, there's a lot of things I can read about the letter Kuf and let you get these ideas. The concept of harvesting is in the letter Kuf. All the words, not all the words talking about harvest, but a lot of them incorporate the letter Kuf into those words. And interestingly enough, the last 3 letters after the Kuf, Resh Shin Tav, if you look it up in the red dictionary, and what does that word spell? It means to collect or gather your own stuff. So what do you do when you harvest? You cut down, and then you pick up your stuff. And of course, there's parables in the New Testament about gathering the wheat and the tares, and separating them into 2 different piles and burning up the tares. One of the papers I handed out a couple weeks ago regarding the alphabetic letters and their natural sequence, and you can see what the words are spelled. If you take Aleph, Bet, Gimel, what's that word? If you take Vav, Zayin, Het, what is that word? If you take Nun, Samik, what's that word? If you take Resh, Shin, Tav, it's on that chart. I don't know if anybody was able to look at that and make sense of it, but you can see what words are embedded in the natural sequence of the alphabet if you just spell words in that sequence, frontwards and backwards. So when we get to Kuf, the letter Kuf as a meaning is the back of the head. Well, you can kind of see at the back of the head here, right? So if this was a person's nose and chin, and that's the back of the head. But the main part of the handle is the neck. And the neck, literally, nexus is a Vav concept, and it's that which joins this thing to that thing. But nexus is also that which turns around. All these other words are embedded in words that have the letter kuf in them. So you could say, well, when David killed Goliath, he lopped his head off. Well, there's a kuf picture in that story of David chopping off Goliath's head, because it's the back of the head and the neck. See, the letter resh is simply a head. But as a head, it's an exalted man. We'll get into that next week. But the relationship, remember, between Mem and Nun was that Mem is like the water and Nun is the fish that lives in the water but jumps out. Mem is like a womb. The child jumps out and lives its own life, and it's in an environment, but it's not the environment. Kaf and Lamed is like where you get the word for kidney and heart. One's a filter, one's a pump. It's the Torah. The instructions like the Constitution, and then the Lamed is like the Supreme Court, the interpreting of the instructions, telling you how to do it, and so it's the rendering of the applicable use of the instructions themselves. So Kaf and Lamed work as a pair, Mem and Nun work as a pair. Ayin is an eyeball, Pei is a mouth, and there are these two ways that Samik is what you're supposed to do is either righteousness or wickedness. Ayin is the scales, and so you're supposed to do this, then you get evaluated, then Pei is the mouth that explains. But if you look at the occult, Ayin, instead of the Pei, the words of his mouth, and you're going to get in trouble. I'm trying to show you the way these letters are related to each other in their sequence. Samik looks like kind of a tree with branches, and Ayin is also like a fruit, and the fruit is what you inspect to see if the tree's good. And so Ayin is not only an eye, but it's what you do with your eye. You consider, you weigh, you measure, you calculate, you assess. Pei is the festival of Sukkot, where you have to do with mouth things, so you're speaking, you're singing, you're fellowshipping, you're eating, you're breathing, And then Zadi is this sprout after the Samik Ayin Pei. So there's this picture here of you come into, let's go back to the Mishkan pattern. You're out in the darkness. That's the place of Vav and Zion, a man and a weapon, or the moat and the bridge across the moat in order to get into the Het. Once you get into the Het, you're in a whole different place. Well, the letter Het is the 8th letter, and 8 is generally regarded as meaning new beginning. 7 is the Zion, and it means to cut off. It's like the bouncer at the door that restricts entry. So you've got these ideas that there's a package of 7, which is a full package. As a matter of fact, the word Shavah, which is Shin Bet Ayin, or you can add a Vav in here, Shavua, means 7, or a package of 7. It also is the word for an oath, or to swear an oath, or the obligation of a sworn oath is a 7. So this first full package of 7, there's this cutting off, and then you've got this fence, this Het, which is another matter. So everything inside the Het is another matter than what was outside the Het, cut off, limited by the 7, the Zion. Well, there's 2 weapons in the alphabet. There's the Zion and the Zadi. See, Kuf isn't exactly a weapon. It's a concept of a shape of a harvesting tool, and if you were going to get harvested, you might think of that as a weapon, but it's not a weapon per se. But the Zadi is a fish hook or a harpoon, and the word Zad, it means hunter. And we talked about the letter being like a hunter with his knee up in the air and these other connotations in the design of it. So you got these 2 letters that are weapons, or they both do some cutting business. Of course, Kuf cuts also. But the letter after the weapon, like the Het, the Kuf is the letter after the Zadi. So there's a relationship now between the Kuf and the Het. There's other types of relationships in the letters. Like I said, there was Mem and Nun, there was Kaf and Lamed. You've got 2 letters which represent men. You've got the Vav, and if you look up the chart here, it says Ben, and you'd have to know how to read this, but it's Yod Vav Samik Pei, which is Yosef. There's this concept of 2 Messiah notions. Is it 2 Messiahs? Is it 1 Messiah coming twice? Is it 1 Messiah with 2 aspects of his mission? There's Ben Yosef in the position of the Vav man, and then there's Ben David in the position of the Resh man. Well, the Resh is an exalted man, and you might say the Vav is kind of like this concept of the common man. And then, so if you go back and read the story of Joseph and what happened to him, you'll have this picture, what some people say is the first coming of the Messiah. His brothers didn't like him. They wanted to kill him. They sold him for 20 pieces of silver. He was thrown in the dungeon. He was elevated to prestige. He hid his identity. Then he reveals his identity. There's more things to the story, and you can take it this way or that way. But the point is, that's different than the story of David. Of course, David was also despised by his brothers. He was the least, and finally he was picked by Samuel and anointed king and became the greatest king of Israel. But that's not true. You'd think, well, was he the greatest king? Or was Solomon the greatest king? I heard someone say neither was the greatest king. Joseph was the greatest king of Israel. It's like, was Joseph a king of Israel? Depends what you mean by king. Joseph ruled over his brethren, and he stored up the wealth of Egypt, though he was in a position of what's called a vizier of Egypt, and he gave all the loot, basically, in the positions of authority to his family. I mean, he really provided for his people. What I'm saying is that there's these different models where if you're reading the book of Joseph, and the story of Joseph, and you think, what does that got to do with the Vav? Then you're reading about David, what does that got to do with the Resh? Well, these two letters are men, the Vav and the Resh. The common man, who is zioned, slain, cut off. What about the Tet? Well, that's like an enclosure. That's like being put into a tomb. And the Tet is this big round thing, like a big round stone rolled in front of the tomb. And the Yod letter Yod, the 10th letter, as a suffix means, this is mine. Well, the letter Aleph, the first letter, as a prefix means I will. So we talked about this before at the week of the Yod, where you could look at the Aleph through the Yod, the first 10 letters, and read the whole thing as a story saying, I will do this of my own accord, myself. That's Aleph and Yod. Well, what would you do? Well, Bet means to take the plan of the Aleph and incorporate it into the physical manifestation of the cosmos, of the universe. It's the Aleph, the maker of heavens and earth, making the material universe, but it also is a picture of he will put himself into material form. And if somebody says, he can't do that, he can do anything he wants. Well, he wouldn't do that. Well, only if you know his mind and his disposition would you say he wouldn't do that. But if you look at this and say that Aleph means I will and Bet means materialization, it's the word house, it's also a body, and it means to put something into this form. Gimel is a sent one, a voyager, an ambassador. Boomerang sent, a camel sent out like a truck that comes back and goes back and forth, right? Jacob's ladder, the Melachim, the messenger is going up and down. Dalet is a door, but it's also the fourth letter, and 4 represents conceptually. There's talks about the 4 corners of the earth, north, south, east, and west, the 4 seasons. 4 is earthiness. But the word, if you look back on that other chart that I did about the natural letters, Bet Gimel Dalet is the word baged, which is clothing, similar to the English word bagged, baggy, which means camouflage. So you could read Aleph, Bet Gimel Dalet, as I will incorporate myself into this form of camouflage to voyage to the earth. We think of putting on a spacesuit and going out in outer space. This is the inverse. This is like the one from beyond the material realm puts on an earth suit and comes and walks the earth. Hey, revealed as, though he's camouflaged, revealed as Vav the man who would be Zion slain and then put into a tomb, Het, with the door rolled over it, or Het, door rolled over it, Tet, and said, and I did this. Don't blame the Romans, don't blame the Jews. This was my plan. That's Aleph through Yod. Kaf is you or yours, so you could say, well, is this, it also as a prefix means like. So you could look at the Kaf is the end of the first 10 letters, the 11th letter saying, I did all this for you. This is yours. So here's the plan to do all this stuff, and it's yours. You want it? Now it sounds like Christianity, but it's not. It sounds like who Jesus Christ is supposed to be. But this, I believe, is Yeshua, which is the Yahweh's Shin Ayin. Shin Ayin means to save, redeem, deliver. Yod He Vav. Yod He is a short form of Yahweh. It's pronounced Yah. Vav is a connector. And Shin Ayin means save, help, redeem, deliver. So you could say Yahweh's connecting bridge of deliverance is this word Yeshua, spelled Yod He Vav Shin Ayin. Now there's different ways to spell Yeshua. There's probably half a dozen different forms you might see. But at least this way of spelling Yeshua, Yod He Vav Shin Ayin, is, we'll talk about that in a minute regarding this picture. And then Lamed means unto. It means, the word lamed means teach and learn. But unto means this is for this reason. Mem nun. Mem means something hidden, which will then be revealed. Nun is something that's put into action. Mem is a place of nurturing, and nun is that which then initiates something restarting. So you could say, lamed mem nun, that spells a word. It means in order that, or so that. You can look it up in the Red Dictionary. But the point is, if he says Aleph through Yod, this is for you, in order that it will generate this new thing of life activity, which is then Samak Ayin Pei. So Samak Ayin Pei work together as this triad, and we talked about those being the fall feasts of Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, lining up with the equivalents of Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, what is good and what Elohim requires of you. Do justly, let's picture the Samak. Love mercy, picture of the Ayin. Walk humbly with your Elohim, the picture of the Pei. How do you walk with him? Regard his words. The Ayin, how do you do mercy? Weigh out mercy as justice. Well, what's justice? Give people what they deserve. No, you hold yourself to justice. That's the Samak. You do justly. You do what you're supposed to do. And the ayin is have mercy on the guy that blows it, commits some offense against you. And then you regard the words of Yahweh. So Samak Ayin Pei work together, and Zadi is this sprout. And we talked about the week of Pei Zadi, which is open mouth, that if we regard his words, the picture of the Zadi is that, like Aaron's rod, the dead stick, which sprouted, budded, put out leaves, put out blossoms, put out fruit. Overnight, suddenly, boom, the whole thing comes together. That which looks dead, but isn't, in Yahweh's capacity, because he's the Elohim of life. Anything can live as far as he goes. No matter how dead we think it is, and according to the standards of our world, this is otherworldly. This is beyond the parameters and the limitations of this dimensional realm, we could say. But what's Kuf? Well, see, when Yeshua was put into the grave after 3 days and 3 nights, the dead body sparked back to life. That's a picture of the Zadi. So if I say he was put into the tomb, Tet, the stone rolled over it, Tet, and Yod, he said, this is my doing. You could, not to get into this right now, but you could count, 3 days and 3 nights, and then the Zadi, he sparks back to life. Well, then what? The Kuf is a picture then of ascending. So the word for comb, that which stands up, you'll see other words that start with a Kuf, which also have to do with that which is put down, standing down, placed. So you see these pictures in the Kuf here. It has to do with a flow and a resistance. It has to do with a pillar standing in concrete or set in a footing, to gather and go, to pour it out like a stinger. There's all these different pictures with a Kuf that has to do with an environment like a circle and something going through the environment like a straight line. So then you'll have other, I don't have an eraser up here, you'll have other images of a sphere, picture that in 3 dimensions, and if you cut the sphere in half, well, there's a Kuf picture there. And you end up with, taking half the sphere, you end up with a bowl, and that word for bowl is also a Hebrew word that we'll get into. But what I'm saying is that the Hebrew words are these pictures This happens to be a Greek letter of phi, and if you look at what that letter means, it's up here. It has other connotations too. But see, this is where you can take these one issue and run off with other things, the crazy eight sort of concept. The idea of the kuf, if you come into the het, the big white fence, the pillar of fire, like an exclamation point, over the Ark of the Covenant, the Zadi, and then the billowing pillar of smoke, like a big question mark. So we've used the image of the exclamation point and the question mark being like the kuf, which is exclamation point, question mark, right? You can see that in the kuf, the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke. It's that which rises up, it's that which comes down. The Shekinah glory cloud, as it's called, is that. When Yahweh was at present with his people of Israel, this cloud, this pillar of fire, touched down and was hovering right there over the Ark of the Covenant. Well, I've heard it said that the Holy Spirit is the feminine aspect of Yahweh. And it's like the word ruach, that's breath or wind. That's not feminine, it ends with a het. And the feminine ending is the hey, the male ending is the vav, though it doesn't necessarily mean male and female, it's just masculine and feminine endings of words. But the word, thank you, the word, I'm trying to play with ideas here to give you this overview, so you know where I'm going with this. The word amen, or amen, Aleph, Mem, Nun, is where we get the word faith. If it's Aleph, Mem, Nun, Hey, that you could say, well, that's a feminine ending. Is faith feminine? This ends up reading as faithfulness. It's the expression of what you do if you have faith, but the word Aleph Mem Nun also basically means trustworthy and solid, somebody you can count on. Why? Because they will behave faithfully. Sometimes you'll even see the word with the hey here, and you could say, well, it means the faith, and sometimes it's without that, and sometimes it's with that. But the point is, I'm trying to show you that to think of the word that ends in a hey, oh, that's female. Not necessarily. For example, the word last week, Zadik, Zadi Dalet Kuf, or you could write it as Zadi Dalet Yod Kuf, which would be the righteous one. The one doing righteousness is pretty much this. Zadik is the concept of righteous. But if you're doing acts of righteousness, philanthropic helpfulness to people, it's Zadikah. Well, that doesn't mean if you help somebody you're being female. It's a grammatical form. So the word Sheken, Sheen, I think it's Sheen Kaufman, is where we get the word for neighbor or to dwell. And if it's, maybe there's a yod in here for Shekinah, but if you put a hey here, it's the fact that it's dwelling. It's in the process of dwelling. But I don't personally see that makes it female. It's just the feminine tense, you might say, because the feminine is that which shows something. For example, there's this other word, which I understand they talked about at the conference, the Shebrews conference, which was Ayin, Zion, Resh, Azar, and this was, I believe it was Nun, Gimel, Nagad, I think that was a Hey. Does anybody remember that? Nagad? Is anybody there? Anyway, the point is, this is what it says, that Yahweh made Chava as a helpmate for him. And you can say, well, what does this mean? The method that I've been using to look at these words is pretty simple. If you look up in the dictionary, well, this is an eye. This is the weapon, that's the Zion, right? This is a head, or an exalted man. This basically means the, or it's a window. This is nun, which you could say is a fish, or basically has to do with life. This is a gimel, which is a camel, but it also means like back and forth, right? Dalet, door. Vav, as a suffix at the end, can mean his. What do you do with that? The other thing you can do is look at ayin zayin. And ayin zayin in the dictionary, and this is why the Red Ernest Cline's dictionary is so helpful, ayin zayin is pronounced Oz. You could say like, oh, the Wizard of Oz. What was the Wizard of Oz supposed to be? There's pictures and connotations all through our culture of Hebraic stuff. The word Oz means bold, dynamic, acrid, sharp. It's the word for a goat. You can say, well, why would a wife be like a goat? Well, because it's a picture of a goat on a very high, steep mountain who's walking boldly across it. It's pictures embedded in these words. So when you picture, gosh, how can that goat do that? You go up to Montana Glacier Park and you see these goats walking on these steep cliffs with very narrow little footholds, and it's like, they're fearless. It's amazing. But what is Zayin Resh? Well, the meaning of Zayin Resh is actually stranger. So now you have a bold stranger. What's that thing got to do with the wife? Well, if you look at the word then spelled Ayin Zayin Resh, and it has to do with that which wraps around. It's the picture of, well, here, it's a picture of this gold band wrapped around this image. It's a picture of this black frame around this picture, or around that. It's like the frame around a picture, or a bandage around a cut, that which holds it together. It's different than the one main thing, but it's that which wraps around and contains, gives reference to, and actually helps the first thing maintain its integrity. And then if you do the same thing with this word, you can look at this word, you can look at that word, you can look at this word, and you can look at Hey Noon, and you put those all together, and you end up extrapolating what's embedded in these words. I have it written down, we can go over it later, but I'm just trying to show you the mechanism. I'm trying to give you the overview, the helicopter view. The kuf means, after this, it's the back of the head. But it's also, what if you walked past, what do you leave behind? Footsteps. So the word Yaakov, remember he was grabbing at his brother's stuff? So the word Yaakov means he will, and it's spelled Ayin Kuf Yod, he will, Ayin Kuf Bet, Yaakov, and it's translated supplanter. Why the supplanter? Because he's got this far reach. Why does the monkey have to do with a kuf? He's got this long reach. He can jump from here to there, swinging through the trees. Why does the kuf come after the zadi? What happens after the Ezekiel 37, the valley of dry bones that were considered to be completely dead? And Yahweh said to Ezekiel, Son of man, think these bones can live? And he says, hey, you know. You can do anything. You know whether they're going to live or not. He says, speak to them. Prophesy to them. Tell these bones to live. Okay. The point is, the letter kuf, like the letter het, after the letter zayin, is a whole new thing. Letter 8 means new beginning. The letter zayin cuts off. The letter zayin is this sprout coming back to life, but this kuf is this whole new thing after this. The word for footsteps, that which you leave behind, is also this kuf concept, because once you go, that's what's behind you. Once you go past, the back of the head is what's behind you. So when Moshe asked to see Yahweh's kavod, or glory, he said, no man can see my face and live. Well, I would say, well, what letter is that? That's got to be a resh, because that's like the head and the front of the face kind of drawn. But he says, you can see my backside. Well, that's the kuf view, the backside. So he put his kaf, open hand. He said, I will put my coffee, I will put coffee on you. It's a little English joke. Oh, you put coffee and you can, wake up and see what's going on. But literally, the word is spelled kaf pe yod, coffee. I will put my open hand on you, shelter you. You'll put you in the cleft of the rock. I'll pass by. I'll take it off, and then you'll see this glory cloud. He saw the Shekinah, as it were, of Yahweh when he passed by. This aura of Yahweh. Well, then you say, well, wait a minute. If the two letters, I'm kind of jumping around here, but I'm trying to tie all these things in for you. If he sees this aura of Yahweh when he passed by, what did he see? Well, that's an English word, but if you say, well, there's this light, and that which the light reveals, you might say, well, aura might be pronounced like that, even though it's an English word. But remember, here's these two men, Vav and Resh. And what's Aleph? Well, Aleph is the plan of what he's going to do. So right there in the word for light, you could read it as, I'm going to appear as Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David. But when's this? Kuf, after this. Resh comes after Kuf. So somehow after the Zadi, after the Kuf is this connecting word that just means later. He's going to appear as the Vav man who is slain, resurrect, come back to life, Zadi, and then later, sometime off in the distant future, Kuf also means ascend, and remember what the Melachim said to the disciples, the Talmudim, the taught ones? They said, why do you stand here looking up into the Shemayim, the heavens? This one that you saw go up is going to come back the same way from the clouds after this, a long time in the future. That's after Kuf, when he's going to come back as the Resh, sheening. Now, sheening may mean shining, and it may mean this is El Shaddai, but also remember, sheen is fire. So when he comes back, as the New Testament tells us, he's going to torch his enemies. He's going to burn up the wicked, like one burns the thorns and the tares. And so you read this alphabet, and you say, well, here's this picture of this sprouting back to life, and then there's this threshing, where the exalted man burns up something, his enemies, but he also talks about throwing even his own into the refining fire to see what we're made of. If we have done what he said, or our works, or our zadikah, the good things that we do, or whatever, they will be put into the fire and tested to see whether it's gold, silver, precious stones, and the wood, hay, and stubble will be consumed. That's right there in these letters. But it's not Christian. So what is this? The message from the beginning. The message from before there was ever a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist or anybody else. These are God's words. Yahweh, we believe, put these letter sequence together, and he's saying, at the end, after this, see, the picture of the Zadi can also be every one of our regular lives where we die and we get buried, and all of a sudden one day we're going to wake up and go, uh-oh. So as I mentioned a couple weeks ago or last week, here's the picture of the little skeleton in the casket with kind of these big eyes. Like, imagine suddenly having consciousness again. It's like, gosh, I hope I was right. I hope I lived my life. I'm about to be put under the fiery refiner's fire and to see what my life consisted of. So why are we doing all these things here? This same word azar is the same word as helper. So if somebody says, oh, he made a helpmeet suitable for him, the English version of that really diminishes what's embedded in these words. If we look at these concepts and say, what is Yahweh trying to tell us? You go back and read the alphabetic sequence. Let me go through them again in a little different way. If you go to try to tell somebody that there's going to be a resurrection day and they're going to wake up suddenly after being bones in a casket, they're going to wake up one day and face the judge, the evaluator of their life, they might say, I don't care. That doesn't scare me. It's like, big deal. I'm not even concerned. Should you then go tell them about salvation and the Torah instructions and everything else? It's like they can't, if they don't even want to deal with existence and eternity, why am I here? Remember, at the very beginning, we talked about the 4 basic questions that all peoples of all cultures ask. Who am I? Why am I here? Where did this come from? And what's going to happen later? You can't get past those questions. Someone who's an atheist or someone who says, I don't care, or whatever, they basically just say, doesn't matter. I don't want to discuss it. End of subject. You can't go any further. There's no conversation with them. You could say, you really should care. And it's like, doesn't matter. So the interesting thing about this model is that out here in the beginning, it's simply black and white. Between the darkness of this world, the lack of proof, the lack of evidence, the lack of, can science prove there's a God? Can science prove we have eternal life? What do we have? Theories, religions, philosophies, but what do we really have? Nothing. Faith, but faith is based on nothing, really, because faith is the evidence of things which are not seen, right? We really don't have anything to base our faith on. But for Yeshua out here in the darkness, to be crucified, dead, and then come back to life, suddenly that's something to regard. That's something that says, how do you explain that? That's a true miracle. It doesn't just happen. It's beyond this realm. Well, this notion of the big white fence in the face of the darkness, and this, again, is the basic Mishkan pattern. We got this big white fence. That's the Het, and not to go over and over and over this, but we got this being the Het, Tet, and Yod, right? Yahweh's kingdom. So the 4-colored door, blue, purple, red, and white linen, Yahweh's name in color, the big white fence, the kingdom of heaven, in the midst of the darkness. So here's the darkness, and there's the big white fence, even though it's blue. That's another pattern. It's a wheel within a wheel. We talked about that a few weeks ago. Just to clarify, there's different systems working within each other here. The first thing to regard is simply, you've got life and death, Vav Zion, and you have this picture of the kingdom of Yahweh. Not just some random deity, not just God, not just heaven, but Yahweh's name on the 4-colored embroidery of the white linen parameter saying, I have a kingdom, I have a realm, and the white light of it, remember the pillar of fire behind it would make it shine like a lampshade, as it were, is in stark contrast to everything that's in the darkness, which is essentially the desert, the slavery, the miseries, those things which were in Egypt. And he says, I am Yahweh who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, what's kind of like the English word misery, out of the house of bondage, to set you free to keep my words. It's another form of bondage, but we're free to keep his words, because in Egypt they were not free to keep his words. My point is, the first voice, there's a word in Hebrew for voice. Does anybody know what it is?
Cold.
Cold. You know how to spell it?
Yeah, well.
Kuf, Vav Lamed, is the word for voice. Now, you might say, okay, does anybody know about the book of Revelation that he heard 7 thunders? And remember, he heard 7 thunders, but he was told, don't write down what you heard. Well, if you look in the Red Dictionary, this same word voice is the same as thunder. It's also a noise or a report. So I had these other fellows play these mouthpieces. That's a coal. That's a voice. Didn't sound like a thunder. Well, I mean, we might have had these tremendous shofars playing, and we might think, oh yeah, that's the voice of Yahweh, these thunders. And it's like, but remember, was Elijah heard the still small voice? And he said it wasn't in the earthquake or the fire, but the voice is still small. It's like, what if the voice isn't what we expected to hear? It's still a coal. To see the fact that it's translated thunder in English came out of Greek or Latin, I don't know what it came out of. Was it thunder? Was it voice? I don't know what it was. But there were 7 voices, but we're not told what those voices were. If we look at the Hebrew model, and I'm not saying this is what the 7 voices were, but let's see if we can figure out what are the 7 things that Yahweh said. The Mishkan is, here's the darkness, here's the kingdom, you need to choose, but there's a moat here, and you have to get through here because of the bridge, and that's where Yeshua died on the cross, and that's the place of the red heifer. Cow's head sitting here on a barbecue grate, that's the image here. So there's one voice that says, you better regard eternal life and the kingdom of Yahweh compared to a man who will live a mortal life and then die out here in the darkness and bondage. It's simply that voice. And if nobody wants to regard that voice, there's no point in discussing anything else of the matter. And if they don't acknowledge, why should they regard there's a fact here? Is because Aleph is the author of the infinite one who created the limited cosmos of the material realm, which is Bet. And anybody who says, well, I'm going to believe in evolution, I'm going to believe there is no deity, I'm going to believe there is nobody that's a creator, well, you're not even, you haven't even convinced them of Aleph. Why talk theology about the rest of this stuff? If you don't deal with the sequence that Yahweh gave us, start with Aleph. He's the guy that made this place. What place? Bet. This place. The place we're in. Gimel. He set the thing in motion. He also came here. I can't believe he came here. Well, then you can debate the Gimel of the Aleph betting, but there's no point in discussing anything else. So the interesting thing about this is it's a very logical progression. But this is the first issue. And you could almost say, this is a thundering voice to regard this matter. Right inside and it says right inside the door was the altar of sacrifice. And it lines up with the Kaf and the Lamed, which is the Torah. So just to fill in the pattern, this first thing was like the Yod, the Creator, and this is like the Hey, which is the revelation of the Creator, which is the Torah. That's a pretty thundering voice of Yahweh. Regard his instructions. Mem, you better nurture it because it's going to bring forth blessing and cursing, the place of the labor, which is the Mem Nun. And that's basically a matter of our regard to nurture, and we will bring forth the blessing or the curse based on what we do. That's a pretty distinct voice. A thundering voice, you might say. The next thing in the set-apart place was the Psalmic. Do justice and righteousness, not wickedness. That's the imperative demand based on how we have regarded this turns into that. Again, that's a pretty thundering voice. There will be a judgment day. The place of the table of showbread, the word showbread is panim, which is faces, and it's almost like the masks will come off, and he'll gauge our fruit. What have we done? And you could say, it's all under the blood. I didn't do anything. It's like, it almost sounds like the servant who said, hey, I was scared. I buried the talent you gave me, and here's your talent back. And he said, get out of here, you worthless servant. We're supposed to be doing something. We can say, oh, gee, we're forgiven, but there's a difference between being forgiven and being a responsible, faithful servant. The word faithful is amunah, which is aleph, mem, nun, hey. It's doing and revealing and looking like, showing the stuff that you believe in action. Judgment Day, the scales. That's a pretty serious voice. I would say that's a thundering voice. The altar of incense, lining up with the pay, the fellowship of the saints, of the kadoshim, of the talmudim, of the taught ones, the ones who are in fellowship with Yahweh's kingdom regarding his word, the festival of Sukkot, together, the 12 tribes, everybody doing their part, coming back together to fellowship and rejoice. And remember, the commandment of Sukkot was Ak Sameach. Only rejoice. The pay, the mouth, the rejoicing in his words with each other. That's a pretty loud voice as well. The Ark of the Covenant, the Zadi, picture of the Torah, where he says, this is the promise, the hope set before you. This is the model, the archetype, the icon, the picture of Yeshua walking out the Torah instructions perfectly as the model and saying, see, I did it, you guys can do it. It's not too far away, it's not too high, it's not on the other side of the world, it's not in the depths of the sea, it's in your mouth to do it. Eat unleavened bread, and when your kids ask you, why are we eating unleavened bread, you'll tell them the story of the Exodus, and the Torah will be in your mouth. Everything's pictures and types and behaviors. There's 7 voices there. Any questions? Oh, here's the question mark and the exclamation point, which is the kuf. And remember, the lamed means teach and learn. It's the voice of authority. It's the shepherd's staff. And the vav is a connecting, like a nail, a hook, and a bridge. It's Yeshua, the man who came as the good shepherd. So here you could say the question mark and the exclamation point. Any questions about what the voices are? Yeshua, the man who came as the good shepherd to give us the instructions over the things that he gave the exclamation point over regarding the stuff that we were wondering about, is the coal of these things in the Mishkan. And these line up with every letter between the Vav and the Kuf. So here you have this box, the Mishkan itself, the fence as it were, and then the cloud over it, this mushroom-shaped cloud over it, is kind of like the cap of the box. And the interesting thing is, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, is that the word spelled Tet Kuf. If you don't know what this word means, look at the picture for a minute. You've got the kingdom of Yahweh with a definite perimeter. All it contains. What does it contain? The promise of the light of eternal life compared to the mortal death of a man. You've got the promise of something on the other side of the bridge that Yeshua, the Vav man, came to bridge for us. And if that weren't enough, the Tet is like the potter's wheel, and the Yod spinning around as he forms us to be conformed to the image of the Zadi. We will be conformed, once we've come in, to the image of the one who is the Zadik, the righteous one. That's the objective, that's the agenda. The whole reason for coming in here is to be conformed to the image of that righteous one. And Yeshua came embodying it, and the reason why he's considered sinless is because there was no fault, there was no crime. He never broke a single instruction, law, word, or letter of the Torah. He did everything. He even kept the Sabbath day and the festivals as instructed. He did everything he was supposed to do. We will be conformed to his image. And inside here is the Torah instructions, and inside here is the laver where we're cleaned. Remember, it's made out of the bronze mirrors of the women, this reflection of yourself. You can look in there and you can see yourself in these words. Yeshua said, I'm the vine, you're the branches of the menorah. He's the judge of heaven and of earth, of all he made. He's the one who is called the living Word. He's the one who's the Word expressed. The Word became flesh. The Ark of the Covenant, the tables of the tables of stone that the 10 Commandments were written on, Aaron's rod that budded, the manna, the evidence of Yahweh's provision miraculously, where there was no way to even think that there would be provision. Water in the desert came out of a rock. Who could imagine that? Manna appeared like dew in the morning on the ground. Who would have figured? They were hungry for meat. Quail showed up. I understand, somebody did some research, that these quail do this from time to time. They come from the middle of Africa, and they come flying up by the billions, especially back then before a lot of them were made extinct. But they just fall exhausted on the shores of the Mediterranean. You can say, well, it wasn't a miracle then necessarily that the quail showed up when they were hungry for meat, because it was a natural phenomenon. A real miracle is something which is an unnatural phenomenon, like Yeshua raising from the dead, ascending up into the sky. But the quail showing up wasn't a miracle per se. The miracle was the timing. The day they grumbled, and Yahweh said, you'll have quail tonight, and it was 3 feet deep all around the camp because they had been flying for the last couple of weeks or however long it took them to come from the middle of Africa to land right there. It's like Yahweh had the whole thing planned. They would have fallen that night, you might say, unless the wind blew them somewhere else, of course. But they'd been coming for how long? Flying, and they said, oh, we're hungry. They didn't even have any idea what to expect next. Why? It was too far of a stretch. They couldn't imagine it. So here you have all these examples in Yahweh saying, listen, the stuff I have planned for you, though it seems like a real far stretch, though it seems like way off in the distant future, though it seems like it won't be in your lifetime, though you think it's a dead stick and it's not going to happen, you guys have no idea what I have planned for those of you who love me, who regard my word. And when I come to harvest my own, I've got all kinds of cool stuff stored up. Now, we think, at least I was taught Christian thinking, was, well, that's at the end of the world. That's after I rise from the dead. That's the model, and it seems to fit the pattern here. What this class is about, I'm not saying that's not true, but there are verses in the Scripture, all through the Old Testament, that talk about another promise of what's going to happen to the generation of Israel who chooses to regard the words of Yahweh. And when his words, Zadi, come back to life in our hearts, and we have a passionate zeal for his personal words, something that he has stored up as a treasure in the heavens. The opposite picture of the Kuf is not only a picture of Yeshua rising up and going up into the eternal realm, and a picture of him coming back, the last day, the rapture day, of him coming back with the hosts of heaven and landing. Both these are Kuf pictures. It works both ways. But there's this picture of what Yahweh said that he has stored up for Israel. Stored up in heaven, he's going to pour out upon his people. So we're right upon a break here, but what we'll talk about in the next half is some verses that are in Deuteronomy and a few other places where it talks about what Yahweh is going to give us back, which is the Kuf view. If we regard his words, we have to qualify for him to give us this stuff. The whole idea is, how do we qualify? These are the 7 voices. Each piece of this Mishkan pattern is a voice, a thunder. Is it what we expected to hear? Like going through this little mouthpiece? Each one of these pieces of the Mishkan are a mouthpiece of Yahweh. And it's like, what if this is what he was talking about all along? What if what we're doing right here is kind of like the evidence of what John was told to hide? I'm not going to tell him what the 7 voices are. I've already told him what the 7 voices are. Let them figure it out. Let them drosh, seek my word to figure out what I said. And when they want to know what my voice was, well, then I'll reveal it to them. And we're at that place now because we're outside the 2007 or 30-year curse, and we stand in the position to get this. We're on a break.